The Mediterranean storm struck the Amalfi Coast like an ancient fury, hurling sheets of rain against the terracotta rooftops of San Michele del Mare. In this remote fishing village, where the sea had provided life for generations, the wind carried whispers of darker tides. The year was 1962, and in the villa overlooking the harbour, old Salvatore Torrino sat in his wine cellar, listening to the storm rage above. He had no way of knowing these would be the last sounds he would ever hear. Salvatore Torrino owned half the boats in San Michele's harbour, a fortune built from decades of commanding the Mediterranean's bounty. But wealth had not brought him peace. His 3 adult children circled him like vultures, each drowning in their own desperate needs. Marco, the eldest, gambled away his inheritance in Naples card games. Elena, unmarried and bitter, dreamed of escape to Rome. Giuseppe, the artistic youngest, watched his paintings gather dust while his family grew hungry. Tonight, they would all gather for dinner, unaware that their patriarch's final meal was already being prepared. Dawn brought no respite from the storm, only the terrible discovery. Elena found her father's body floating face down in the flooded wine cellar, his grey hair spread like seaweed in the dark water. The ancient stone walls had held back the Mediterranean for centuries, but last night somehow seawater had invaded this sacred space. Inspector Costa arrived from the mainland, his practiced eye immediately noticing what the grieving family had missed. The water in Salvatore's lungs was salt water from the sea, not rainwater from the storm. In a cellar that should have been sealed against the elements, murder had found its way inside. Inspector Costa sealed the villa as the storm continued to rage, trapping the family and their secrets within the ancient walls. The wine cellar, he determined, had been deliberately flooded with seawater pumped in through an old drainage pipe that connected to the harbour. This was no accident of nature, but a calculated act of murder. As he interviewed each family member in the dimly lit parlour, their desperate motives emerged like shadows in candlelight. Marco confessed to debts that would destroy him. Elena admitted to stealing from the household accounts to fund her restaurant dreams. Giuseppe revealed his wife was pregnant again and they had no money for another child. Father Benedetto arrived at the villa, his black cassock drenched from the storm, his face heavy with burden. The night before Salvatore's death, the old fisherman had made his confession, speaking of sins that stretched back decades. The priest's sacred vows prevented him from revealing what he'd heard, but his haunted eyes suggested secrets darker than anything the family had imagined. Meanwhile, the beautiful tourist from Rome, Francesca Moretto, sat quietly in the corner, her notebook filled with observations that seemed far too detailed for casual research. Inspector Costa wondered what had really brought this sophisticated woman to their remote village. Old Antonio Russo arrived at the villa uninvited, shaking rain from his coat like a seabird. For 40 years, he and Salvatore had been locked in a bitter rivalry that began over a woman named Maria, who had chosen Salvatore and died giving birth to Marco. Antonio's fishing operation had always lived in Salvatore's shadow, and his boats struggled while the Torrino fleet prospered. In the wine cellar, Inspector Costa found Antonio's distinctive rope among the debris, the same type used on his boats. But as the inspector examined the rope more closely, he noticed something that would soon shift his suspicions in an entirely different direction. The evidence seemed to point toward Marco. His gambling debts were crushing, and he alone had keys to both the wine cellar and the harbour pump house. Inspector Costa found betting slips in Marco's jacket, debts totaling more than the entire Torrino fleet was worth. The eldest son's alibi was weak, claimed only by his estranged wife, who rarely spoke to him anymore. But as the inspector pressed harder, Marco broke down completely, confessing to stealing from the business accounts but swearing on his mother's grave that he never harmed his father. The tears seemed genuine, but Inspector Costa had seen many guilty men weep convincingly before. As the storm reached its crescendo, Inspector Costa gathered all the suspects in the flooded wine cellar where Salvatore had died. The seawater had been pumped out, but the smell of salt and death lingered in the ancient stone chamber. One by one, he laid out their motives: Marco's debts, Elena's desperate dreams, Giuseppe's growing family, Antonio's lifelong hatred, even Father Benedetto's mysterious burden of confession. But it was Francesca who had been watching everyone most carefully, taking notes that no tourist would need. The inspector's voice echoed off the wet stones as accusations flew like lightning, and the killer's facade began to crack under the mounting pressure. The killer was Francesca Moretto, but she was no tourist. She was Salvatore's granddaughter, the illegitimate child of a daughter he had disowned 20 years ago for refusing an arranged marriage. Her mother had died in poverty in Rome, while the Torrino wealth flowed to children who squandered it. Francesca had come to claim her inheritance, but Salvatore refused to acknowledge her even in his will. The rope in the cellar belonged to Antonio, yes, but Francesca had stolen it to implicate him. She had used her knowledge of the villa's old drainage system, gained from childhood visits before the family exile, to flood the cellar with seawater and stage the drowning. Her notebook contained not tourist observations, but detailed plans for the perfect murder. As dawn broke over San Michele del Mare, the Mediterranean storm finally exhausted itself, leaving the village washed clean but forever changed. Francesca was led away in handcuffs, her carefully planned revenge having consumed not just Salvatore but her own future. The Torrino children inherited their father's empire, but also his secrets, learning too late about the sister they never knew existed. Father Benedetto revealed that Salvatore's final confession had been about his abandoned granddaughter and his regret at never making amends. The wine cellar was sealed forever, but the sea would always remember what it had witnessed. In this ancient village, where family blood ran as deep as the Mediterranean itself, justice had prevailed, but at a price that would echo for generations.